Welcome to today's conversation. We're glad you can join us because I think this one will be one that parents and caregivers will really want to dive into. I'm Jasmine Hood Miller, Director of Family Engagement at Common Sense Media. And we hear from parents and get questions all the time about parental controls, how to set them, which ones work. And that's why I'm excited to speak with our guest today, Kristin Lewis, the Chief Product Officer at Aura. Aura is an online safety company helping to protect consumers and families, and we're thrilled to call them a partner because of the shared values that we have. Kristin leads the development of innovative tools at Aura that helps families stay safe online. And as a longtime product leader and mother of two, Kristin is focused on building technology that protects kids' privacy, safety, and mental health while giving parents greater visibility and peace of mind. Kristin is a passionate advocate for building tech that prioritize people, especially kids, in an increasingly complex digital world. So, welcome, Kristin.
Thank you, Jasmine. Thanks so much for having me.
So I want to start really quickly. We're going to do some quick myth busting. You can just answer true or false to each of these.
Okay.
Parental controls slow down devices.
False.
Okay. Once you set them up, they're permanent.
Absolutely false.
And kids can always find workarounds.
True.
Perfect. Okay. We're going to talk about all of these today. So let's start at the beginning. For parents who may be thinking about or just got their kid their first device, whether that's a phone or a tablet, or maybe their child has had access to a device, but then realize they need to reset and put up some guardrails, right? What are some features and settings to look for within different apps and devices that can help parents manage their child's tech experience? Maybe there's like a checklist you can walk us through if a parent, needed to configure like 3 to 5 settings before handing over that device.
Oh, this is a great question. Because I think part of what contributes to the overwhelm for parents is that there are so many options about where do the parental controls exist, which ones do you need on, which ones override the others. So if you think about it, you've got controls on individual devices like, an Apple iOS or Android. You've got specific apps that have their own parental settings for what kids can do and see inside an app itself. You've got like household level network and like Wi-Fi settings where you can control like online and offline times. And then you've got parental controls apps, or is one of those that really are out there to try to help you do all of those things all in one place a bit easier. So all of these are good. They can all come together. I would say no matter where you're doing these controls, to answer your question of like, what are some of the 3 to 5 things that parents should be doing no matter what? Definitely, especially if you have a child, under 13, turn on parental controls and those age appropriate kind of content filters. It would be entirely too easy for a kid, even with the best of intentions, to accidentally stumble upon really unsafe or inappropriate content on any number of TV channels or apps or things like that. The other is kind of the privacy and sharing things. So especially if you have an older teen, when is location sharing enabled, even on their social media sites, how easy or not easy is it to find their personal information through a simple Google search? So those privacy settings, again, especially with older teens with their own devices, would be something really important to do at the device level. And then again, sort of depending on you and your household, but having tools that monitor for risks, that monitor the content happening on the device and can alert a parent around unsafe topics like bullying and things like that, I think would be a third area. Kids can stay well within your established, appropriate apps and time limits and still be having kind of things that any parent would want to be aware of that you can miss, even through conversations. So those would be the big 3.
Yeah, I'm glad that you right off the bat mentioned the overwhelm because there can be so many options. I didn't realize that there was like you can do it through, the device, you can do it through your Wi-Fi router. Like there's services like or there's just so many options as a parent and it can feel overwhelming. So it's really helpful to hear those like very 3 succinct, actionable ways that parents can start, at least just to get started, right? And like I'm a millennial parent. I guess I can say I'm a digital native. I'm tech savvy, I think. But my own kids have checked me on this.
Oh
They
yeah.
have found workarounds and backdoors to things that I've set up and kind of quite easily, might I add. it's kind of like it's a little embarrassing maybe. But what are some of the ways that kids can bypass controls? And also, like, what are some of the unexpected places parents may not even think that kids may stumble upon or find inappropriate content online?
Yeah, great question. And I'm laughing because like I too pride myself on being quite tech savvy. Like this is my space, right? And literally just this weekend, I realized I'm like, I'm so proud of my 9-year-old on his iPad. I put a 1 hour limit on YouTube. He really hasn't been complaining about it at all. And it was a pretty big cut back after I noticed how much time he was spending there.
Mhm.
And I realized this weekend as I walked past the playroom, he's not complaining because when his time limit runs out on his device, he's turning on the television, going onto my YouTube profile and watching the rest of his Mr. Beast episodes there. I didn't even realize it's not that I didn't know that you could do that. I just didn't know that my 9-year-old would have like thought through it.
Mhm.
And so that's an example of just, kids they're very smart. And even, he's like, well, I ran out on my iPad, but you didn't say I couldn't watch it at all. And that's technically true. So they'll catch you on that. We do a lot of teen interviews as part of just building a product, and we're trying to find this healthy balance between like how do we keep kids safe, which is what parents really want, but give the kid enough privacy to explore on their own, become a good digital citizen. And usually if they don't feel like they're being totally spied on, it can help reduce evasion. But when we interview teens about like, what have you done? What have you done to evade controls that you don't think are fair? Kids will go so far as to change the time zone on their phone so that if there's a bedtime set and things like that, it'll help them get more time or get onto different apps. So there's any number of ways, both intentional and maybe unintentional, that kids will get around the things that you set up. I will say what we see and what we hear, especially again as we do interviews with teens, is if their parents have not talked to them about the controls and restrictions that are in place, it really increases the likelihood that the kid will try to evade them, because it makes it more difficult for a parent to come in and say, we had this contract, we had this agreement, you went around it. If it was sort of well, we never talked about you being blocked from TikTok. So the kid's finding a way to get on there, that can kind of contribute to the evasion dynamic, if you will.
Yeah, well, I just learned something new to make sure to check the time zones. Um,
Yeah.
and it's always the giveaways when they're like with too quiet and you're like, I know the time should have been up, like, and there's no complaining, there's no like, I'm hungry now, I want a snack, or like, it's like,
Yeah.
what's going on over there? So yeah, that's the giveaway. I want to come back to the conversation in just a second and talk about that. But I've also heard from parents some of the places that you wouldn't think that, and not necessarily that the kids are looking for it, but like when it comes to finding inappropriate content. I mean, video games is one that maybe parents would be aware of, but like ebooks, even some podcasts and audiobooks, AI chatbots, we know is a thing. And I'm curious like, what's Aura's approach to monitoring and flagging this type of content for families?
Yeah, it's such a good question because I think so many parents, especially when you get into the teen years, like social media is like the target of so much of the speculation, maybe, or assumption around that's where we need to be really careful and make sure that kids aren't going down a rabbit hole. But to your point, the AI chatbots is another huge emerging area that a lot of parents like wouldn't have thought to expect, or that we don't have as much kind of content around, and video games, different YouTube rabbit holes. So Aura's approach, certainly we help parents like from the get-go of, hey, we understand your child's age, and there's some default things like no parent would want their kids on gambling websites or pornographic websites. You kind of shut down the known sort of things.
Mhm.
From there, monitoring and like surfacing at a thematic level, hey, here's where your kid is having active dialogue. Sometimes that's not really obvious to a parent. So when I think about YouTube, I think about, oh gosh, what is my child consuming? If your kid is going on an adult profile, they could also be making comments and kind of getting into discussion. So like making it really clear to parents, like here are the apps where your child is conversing, whether be that through messages or commenting, and then what is the tone of the messages?
Mhm.
So very few parents have time to go read through every single activity that their kid is doing on every single app. But if we can help give them more of a traffic light around, this is where these types of behaviors and interactions are happening. And hey, out of the 15 places they're messaging, you might want to take a look at these 3. Our goal is to really foster sort of a productive dialogue between the parent and child, less so again surface every conversation, but bring to light, hey, there's sort of conversations about violent role play happening here. Maybe it's a video game, maybe it's maybe it's an ebook, but wherever it's happening, we can bring kind of the meat of that to the parent's eye.
That's really helpful. And going kind of back to that topic of having the conversations, um, building trust, right, between parents and their kids. What I've found as my kids have gotten older is that the parental controls only take you so far. I
Yeah.
have 3 kids. With my youngest, who's 5, it's really helpful for setting up clear, easy boundaries that he can navigate within. But for my older 2, we have rules, of course, and parental controls that can help enforce some of those rules. But really, it's about helping them understand why my husband and I are making these decisions or implementing these boundaries. And I think that when we explain it to them and we have conversations so that they can understand the why, for example, like turning off the chat feature in some of their games,
Yep.
right? It helps keeps them safe, reduces the likelihood of them coming across inappropriate content or behavior that we're not cool with as a family. It opens up an opportunity for us to hear from them too, and they've told us like, yeah, actually I'm not comfortable, or I don't really like when people act like that in the chat. So not only are they not pushing back, but they agree, and we're moving from parental control to family agreements. Of
100%.
course, I'm not saying it always works like this and that they won't or don't push back. But honestly, no one likes to be controlled, including kids. So I think having these discussions, number one, helps them understand that this is for their own well being and not just to keep them from having fun or doing what they want, just like for the sake of it. But also, number two, it's what really helps your kid build up that internal defense and strengthen those muscles that are fortified by your family values, particularly when they find themselves in situations outside of kind of the walled gardens that we can set up at home, like when they go to visit a friend or a relative. And even still, they don't always make the right decisions in those situations, but at least they kind of have your voice in the back of their mind.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for parents to remember that parental controls doesn't mean that they won't slip up, because kids' jobs are to push boundaries, mess up, try again until they get it right. Um, so not putting all those eggs in, that basket of parental controls, are there signs that parents can watch for that indicate that maybe the controls are creating, an environment where their kid is actually, kind of like circumventing or creating more secrecy than safety in families? Like, what are some of the things that parents can look for that are just not the notifications necessarily from their parental controls?
Oh, it's such a good question. You raised so many good points. I want to underscore like your family connection and family contract. And just from personal experience, like the parental controls connotation in and of itself, right, is so one-sided, and I think kids can react poorly. I've made it a real point to explain to my oldest kid, like, I have content filters on my text messages because scams have become so hard to detect and so noisy that, like, I don't trust myself to figure out if this person's saying like, hey, want to get dinner tonight? Like, do I be like, who is this? Or can I not respond? And I show them the thousands of text messages that have been filtered out. I'm like, would you have clicked on that? And I have just found that, like, when we acknowledge that all of us, adults and kids, are all struggling to stay safe with today's digital world, it makes it less of a you're not trusted and more of a like, hey, we're really trying to give you the tools to navigate a dangerous, thing that requires a lot of responsibility together.
Yeah, that's
Um,
great.
yeah. So the second part of your question around, how do we help give the parents sort of visibility into how the child's digital behavior, maybe outside of just the time they're spending and what they're doing, like what are the safe ways to monitor those flags? We really think it's important to understand sort of that connection between your kid's digital life and what's actually going on with their, overall well-being and mental health. There are a lot of signs that point to things like the amount of time that your kid is spending on social media does have a direct correlation to the amount of stress and anxiety that they report feeling. And that can be really different by age and by gender and all of these things. So every single kid is so different. And what we try to focus on at Aura is how do we help each parent understand sort of the baseline social behavior of their child, right? So Jasmine's daughter might be somebody who is super outgoing and like is a major poster on social media. She's liking and commenting on all of these things. She's actively, and my daughter might be somebody who's a much more passive consumer of content on social media and has never really engaged. There's no right or wrong sort of profile of how, but when you start to see changes and anomalies in the way your child was behaving one way, whether it's the amount of and type of activity or the tone and themes of those activity, how do we kind of raise those flags to parents, in a meaningful way so that it's early enough that they can try to intervene and not so invasive that we don't want to have a situation where a parent's like, why did you say this to this person? But more, hey, it looks like, you've been, waking up in the middle of the night and researching some things related to your health. Like, do you have anything that you want to talk about? So again, we're trying to find that right balance between, it's not about micromanaging or spying on your kid, but it is around spotting those signs that can be used to help spot a problem before it's too late.
That's actually, I think that's a really great way to approach it. And it gives, I think, a little bit of agency for each family to manage, for parents, and then also for kids to understand that it's not, like you said, it's not about micromanaging. It's just about their well-being and their safety. At Common Sense, we do lots of research and study the impact of media and tech on kids' development, their emotional, physical, and social development. And this research informs the resources that we create to support kids' healthy child development, including our family tech agreements, which we recently collaborated with Aura on putting out updated version of this. And I know at Aura, your team does research with your users. And in your recent State of the Youth report, one of the key things that you heard, one of the ones that I thought stood out, was that parents argue with their kids about device use more often than about chores or homework. And then conversely, kids said it's the number one thing that they clash with their parents over. What do you think maybe is causing these rifts, and how can families get from arguments to healthy conversations?
Oh, it's such a good question. And it so much does depend on sort of the age and the restrictions or controls, guidelines that you've put in place. So I think making sure that you do truly understand and embrace that this is not a set it and forget it situation. If we all think about, for working parents, like, I know that I try so hard to protect like the 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. window where I can have dinner with my kids, kind of do the school wind down, do the get ready for bed. But sometimes I have to take a meeting, or I have to take a call, or I have to take a text. And my kids actually do call me out on this. Like, I thought none of us were supposed to be on screens during this window. There's a way to handle that. But there are going to be times when you've set, certain boundaries for your kids, and they are really going to have, a reason why they want to go around it temporarily or permanently. So figuring out, like, how do you intentionally not only have that family contract in place, but have kind of either a set cadence or just an understanding that if things come up, you're going to have an open conversation about it. I think that can help really get ahead of, again, like, just the conflict dynamic continuing to escalate. And if you're too rigid about, we set this boundary and come hell or high water, we're going to stick with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think with the pace at which expectations are changing, communication patterns are changing, even where school assignments are happening, like, we all have to, get really comfortable having more of a fluid compass for how do we really stay focused on what were the values we had behind some of the restrictions that we put in place, and how do we kind of focus on those values being upheld, even if the exact how we get there in terms of, what times can be online, what apps can we use to communicate, even if that has to evolve.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, it took my family a few years to kind of get a system that feels like right for us. And like you, I'm in this space. But exactly like you said, for me, with multiple kids accessing new things, whether it's for school or for personal use, developer changes to apps, it took us a few tries to kind of figure out, like, what are the kind of the levers that work for us. And exactly, I think, most importantly, it's knowing your child and honing in. Again, I come back to this family values. And I say that because we have an activity that we give to families that kind of takes tech out of the question for a second and just think about, like, what are the things that matter to you and how do you help prioritize them? What ways do tech, help or hinder kind of prioritizing those values? And so, like, when you think about those, when I think about my own kids, one of my one of my kids really likes creating, and he's been working on stop motion animation. So I'm not so fixated on screen time when he's working on something like that.
Yes, great
Um,
example.
yeah. And another one of my kids really enjoys like video chatting with family that doesn't live nearby. So I say all that to say, we've had to do some adjusting, and we've had conversations as a family to set expectations and create that agreement of when and how we do tech. And so I think parents and families should feel okay knowing that it's not gonna, like, you're not gonna get it right the first time. We already busted the myth that parental controls aren't permanent. You're gonna have to kind of come back to it. It's not a set it and forget it. Is there a recommendation that you have for like how often parents should think about reassessing or updating settings or just their family agreements?
It's a good question. And I will say, I use the analogy in my house, like, and this is true in our house, right? Like, if my kids want to get something out of the fruit bowl, like a banana, an apple, or if they want to have a protein, I don't care if it is pepperoni or turkey, for whatever reason in my house, those are unlimited snacks. They don't have to ask. I actually prefer they don't ask, like, go get your own snack. But if they want Doritos or a fruit snack or any number of the things in our pantry that are, they know that like they have to ask, and that we do have like a limit for when they can eat those things so that they don't ruin their dinner. I think digital behavior is the same. Like my kids know that like they can FaceTime their grandparents and cousins not anytime, you know what I mean? Not at midnight.
Yeah.
But if it's Saturday, they can. So I think figuring out whether it's those educational apps, those music apps, like what are the language learning, like there are really healthy things that your kid can be doing on that device. There's a lot of behavioral science research that shows that positive reinforcement is a much more effective tool for influencing behavioral change than negative. So as much as we have all of this conflict and we're going to need to revisit, hey, there was this thing I didn't want you to be doing that maybe we're going to relax, or as you've earned more, responsibility, we're going to let you try this.
Mhm.
That's always going to be there if you balance it with really figuring out how to identify and really positively reinforce the things that they're doing online that are really good for their brain or their relationships or whatever it may be. That will encourage kids to draw their time to those things just kind of organically. So I think it's finding that balance. And to your question about how often, I think, and this maybe just working at Aura, having an app like ours or paying attention to a company like Common Sense Media, I think no parent could possibly be expected to keep up with like all of the,
Mhm.
well, what are the trends that are emerging? Like, is it, is it normal that my kid is talking to AI chatbots, and what do I do with that information once I see it? I think it would just be so impossible for any parent to navigate that alone. So figuring out, what are the apps and like kind of companies that you can trust to be looking at this data at a broad level and really understanding not just what are kids doing, but how should we be thinking about it? And is there research to connect it to like, hey, do you need to be worried about how much your son is gaming? Or can you kind of rest assured that young kids that are gaming on these types of things are actually showing better math outcomes later in life? I think parents are just sort of craving in this like world where there's not an exact script for how you're supposed to set up limits, having real facts around like, okay, where do I need to spend my time and what battles maybe aren't worth fighting? I think there's a huge need for that.
Yeah, and I know it's the answer that like we don't always love to give because sometimes parents want something very prescriptive, but it is an age and stage. It is the knowing the maturity of your own child, what they're able to handle. At elementary, you might be very like honed in on specific settings and apps, but when they get to middle school, you're adjusting for their independence that they're starting to develop. And in high school, you're really trying to like be able to have them manage with you as a co-pilot as much as possible. Like we're there, more in control of understanding that healthy habits and balance and things like that. So yeah, I think that's really like all the things that you said just like totally makes sense when you think about where your child is, and each of your children, if you have more than one, like they might be in different places.
Yeah, and circling back to your first question, which is like, what are some of the first things parents should set up within that kind of permissioning? Parents have to make a decision of like, are you going to let your kid download their own apps on their own,
Mhm.
or are you going to have that flow through you and you have to request, you have to approve it every time? That's a really good example of like, when you think about the cadence, if depending on the age of your kid, if you have to approve every single new app they want, you actually might be having a lot more like request and checks and go figure out if you want it. then if you were to decide, hey, I'm going to let them do that on their own, but maybe every week on Sunday, we're going to be like, so like, let's take a look together. Like, what were the new apps you were using? What were you, why? And there's no right or wrong, but I think just figuring out how do you want to manage that and how do you make sure you have enough visibility to have the productive conversation and not get too out of sync around what's happening is the key.
Yeah, that's helpful. Okay, so we're going to do a little rapid fire of some digital dilemmas.
Okay.
I want to know what you do in these situations at home with your kids. They don't have to be professionally correct answers. A lot of parenting is
True.
like
Okay.
what I should be doing versus what actually happens when it's a split, second decision.
Yep.
Okay, so the first dilemma is, it is your oldest wants to watch something on the family tablet, family iPad on YouTube, and it's not age appropriate for your younger one. How do you referee?
I often let the younger one watch something else with headphones.
No wrong answers here.
Sometimes
Okay.
I make them agree, but it depends on the situation.
Yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's like we're gonna compromise, and then sometimes it's like, hey, okay, you can get your time. It's not always fair that the oldest has to watch Sesame. They're
Exactly.
like, this is not for me. Cool. All right. So the next one, you recently noticed that your 10-year-old has been receiving friend requests and direct messages from adult accounts on their gaming platform. When you ask them about it, they say, everyone does it and they're just helping me level up. How can you navigate this situation?
This one hits close to home to me, and for my situation, the best thing was to have that conversation, hear out my child around like why he thought it was okay that he was messaging on these apps and why the conversations are okay. And then I had to share back why I think those conversations are not okay. And again, every family will be in a different situation. But for my son, he actually thought that he was talking to somebody he knew. He made an inference based on the username. So it didn't even take that stranger misrepresenting who they were, or trying to build a relationship. It just, my son's instant trust and benefit of the doubt is that this is James and I know a James. So let me actively start engaging this person. But I asked him, if a total stranger that was my age came to the door when I wasn't home and asked if they could come in and sit in the playroom and play this game with you, like, would you do that? And he's like, no. And I'm like,
Mhm.
that's not very different than having an active conversation or, starting to really cultivate a relationship with somebody online who you don't know. Like, they could be anybody. So we reached an agreement that he can add contacts, and he can have chat conversations, but I do have to see who those people are. And ideally, it's like his friends at school. He comes home with slips of paper with like, this is my friend's screen name on this app, and we want to be friends. And that could loosen up over age, but I think sometimes you are going to play the parent card and you're going to have to be the sturdier, wiser, person. And I think doing that, this is an important area not to do the because I said so parenting tactic, but like, here's the real risk. And often it is going to boil down to, it's not you not trusting your kid, it's you not trusting the people on the other side of that conversation. And hopefully that can help diffuse a really big disagreement.
Yeah, I think it's important for parents to remember that they can play the parent card, right? Like that, you know, although a lot of these apps and devices and platforms are not necessarily built for kids, that we still have control, and not in the parental control sense, but just in the sense of like we don't have to give in to everything or every
Right.
feature, and so it's okay to kind of trump that and like you said, and explaining it to your kids so that they understand too. Oh, this isn't really set up for me in a way that's gonna be healthy. So we need to make some adjustments so that you can, ensure their safety.
Exactly.
Um, okay, last one. You've set up your device agreement as a family, which includes some no screen zones within your home, but you've been busted by your kids. And I think you mentioned this earlier.
Real life.
How do you handle it?
So I think the best way to handle it is to fully own it. And like, I'm a fan of Dr. Becky and the whole concept of making repairs. Like, there are going to be times I have a high pressure job. I have teammates that are in totally different time zones.
Mhm.
Occasionally I will have to respond to a text or get on call. But, really looking at your kid in the eye and being like, you're right, I broke the rule tonight. Here was the situation. And sometimes also, by the way, you might just be scrolling Instagram and having a bad night. So whatever it is, whether you need to explain the reason for exceptions and then make sure that if they have an exception, you're honoring it, or just be like, I really screwed up. Oops, my phone is going into timeout in a physical, like, away from me zone. None of us are going to be perfect. And I do think that when your kids see you being human like that and owning up to it the right way, that it does help diffuse some of the like tension around this topic.
Yeah. Yeah. I think probably the trickiest thing is controlling our own behaviors,
Totally.
but knowing that, they're watching us. And, everything that we're modeling, whether intentionally or not, is how they're understanding kind of like what the relationship with, technology should be. And so having to kind of fess up and own it and, be honest, I think is, kind of the only way forward and the only way through it, because we want them to know that it's not always easy, but we are working actively daily on it, and it's hard for kids and it's hard for grown-ups. So
Totally. My
yeah.
son, I'll give you one anecdote because that was like my 6-year-old. It was like the most damning way I've ever been caught. This is like very recently. Is we're not supposed to have any screens on during dinner, but it was like kind of a chaotic thing. One of my kids wasn't home. My husband wasn't home. So I made my son dinner just for him. And he's sitting at the counter eating, and I started checking other things. And he just quietly to himself goes, I thought we didn't have phones on during dinner. And I was just like, so they see it.
Busted. Cool. Well, thank you, Kristen. We could just keep talking, and I'm sure trading stories all day. Do you have any closing thoughts that you want to share with our families?
I think just know that nobody's perfect and everybody's struggling with this to some extent. And if you're engaged and you're really trying to figure out how to create a healthy dynamic around this entire topic of making your kid a good digital citizen, and then you're doing the right thing and you're doing everything you can. So just know you're doing a great job. And if you're wondering if yesterday's 4-hour screen time binge is going to hurt your kid, that no single day is going to put anybody behind. So
yeah, no judgment.
No judgment.
Well, thank you again. I know that many families know Common Sense for our media ratings and reviews of movies, TV shows, books, but we also offer guides on social media, gaming platforms, and AI tools. And you can find these resources along with the work that we are doing with Aura on our site. If you visit commonsensemedia.org, you can sign up for our newsletter, download our app. And I just really want to thank Kristen for being with us today and appreciate this conversation. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Common Sense is your family's go-to source for ratings and reviews for everything, including movies, games, books, and more. We're also here to support parents and caregivers with guidance on key topics such as screen time, online safety, and social media. Educators can find lesson plans and classroom tech tools. And you can learn about the important advocacy work we do to make tech safer for all kids and families. If you want access to some of our resources on the go, download our app from the App Store or Google Play. This puts our vast library of ratings and reviews right at your fingertips, wherever you are. Stay connected and informed by signing up for our free newsletters, offering everything from movie night inspiration and parenting tips to updates on how you can help us improve the digital world for kids everywhere. Sign up at commonsensemedia.org/newsletters. Supporting Common Sense means you're backing a nonprofit mission dedicated to helping families and educators thrive in a world of media and technology. Thanks for being a part of this important conversation. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more engaging discussions in the future.